This is Annie Grace, and you are listening to This Naked Mind podcast, where without judgment, pain, or rules, we explore the role of alcohol in our lives and culture. Hi, this is Annie Grace, and welcome to This Naked Mind podcast. I am so excited because I have a reader here today. His name is Scott, and I cannot wait to hear Scott's story. So Scott, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
So tell me about kind of where did it all begin for you, and who are you?
Yeah, well, I live in Maine, and I've got two kids and a wife, and I got sober about almost 6 months ago now, almost exactly 6 months ago now. Owed largely in part due to reading This Naked Mind. I had struggled for a while, and I can get into that a bit later, but I'd struggled for a while with wanting to stop and should I stop and all of those questions that we all ask ourselves. But I did, and my drinking toward the end of the time I was drinking, I was a daily drinker for sure. And it kind of got to the point where it was whatever was in the house was what I had. That was during the week, and then on the weekends, it was all bets were off. So it was something I definitely, I guess I say I remained responsible, but I wasn't super responsible. But I never got into trouble or had any, DUIs or any of these, crazy stories that you can hear on this stuff. But I knew what I was doing wasn't the right thing to do.
Right.
And I have, alcoholism runs in my family. And I have been aware of this since I was a teenager. But I always like, it's not me, right? It's not me. Until one day it seemed like it was.
Right.
And I had to figure that out. And unfortunately, that day was like 5 years ago. And since then, I lived in this like turmoil about what to do about it and how do I handle it and do I go to a AA? Like, how do I do this? So finally, about, like I said, 6 months ago, I put it down for good.
That's awesome. So yeah, let's talk about that because I think that's one of the things that, I have take such an issue with, and the same was for me. I mean, it was definitely years of knowing that I was not drinking at levels that made me happy anymore, knowing that it wasn't serving me. I felt like there was a period of time where I felt in the driver's seat with alcohol, and I felt like, okay, fine. And then all of a sudden, I was certainly in the passenger seat, and I was being taken on a ride that I did not like the looks of where it was going. But it took such a long time. And I have my own ideas for me about why that took such a long time. But I'd love to hear from you. Like, what were you feeling? What was going on in your head? What sort of fears did you have during that 5 years?
Sure. First of all, I might say that being in the passenger seat with alcohol is probably a better idea in some aspects of the phrase. Um, yeah, so I didn't start drinking until I was in college, actually, till I graduated from high school. And before then, I really didn't like it. And part of that was just being around alcoholism when I was younger. It was just, I don't know, it was just something I was afraid of it. And in some aspects, I think I kind of always knew, like, dude, if you start down this path, like it's, I knew what the slope might be like for me, and I think I was afraid of it. But peer pressure overrode that and whatever. And I got through college, and I moved to New York City after I graduated, and I moved to New York alone and didn't know anyone, and that's when things really started to pick up. And I've been through ups and downs, but to answer your question directly, my in my experience, like it's a helpless feeling. I think that's probably the best way I can describe it. Is I feel like things aren't going the way I want them to. I was afraid for some reason to admit that I had a problem, and I think maybe it's because even though I know and love people who are in AA, but I still have this, and they're not like this at all, just to be clear. But I still have this picture of like an AA meeting and you know cigarettes and coffee and all these strung out people, and this it just was something I just felt like I didn't want to admit to that. And so I tried here and there, like I'd call someone and be like, hey, do you think I have a problem? Which is great because with the exception of my dad is the one that's been in AA, and he was very supportive. And like, if you think you have a problem, only you can decide. But he was good. But a lot of my friends, some of who now, by the way, are in AA, when I'd be like, hey man, do you think I have a drinking problem? And then I think it's like you point out in your book, like as soon as you say that to someone, it makes them think about themselves.
Mm.
And so it became this sort of reinforcing cycle. And I have had, there have been multiple times when loved ones have said to me, like, you need to think about this. I've definitely had, my wife has brought out me multiple times. Multiple people have. But in those cases, it was too in my face. I think a little too upfront, and so I just like refused to accept that. But then when I got to a point where I thought I might need help, that's when I started reaching out to other people, but not fully, right? It was just kind of like definitely a toe in the water sort of thing.
So there's obviously, sort of this perception that we have, not only of AA meetings, but just of not drinking in general and what life is going to look like over there. And like that can be really scary. And
Yeah.
this idea of, do you think if there was something that made it okay 5 years ago to sort of say, okay, let's look at this without one of the things that what I'm getting to is one of the things that really kept me stuck was this idea that I would have to stop drinking forever. And now
Hmm.
I've chosen to stop drinking, but that feels very different to me than I'm going to have to. And so that kept me really, really stuck and
Yeah.
fearful, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean it's right. It's what they say in AA, the whole one day at a time thing. I mean it's being able to look past that, and yeah, it is scary as hell. Like I know, um, especially with the amount that I did it, and the comfort that even though it was causing me turmoil, there still was some comfort there, and the idea of getting rid of that is scary. And then the whole thought of like, what do I do when I don't have that? I go to a lot of conferences, and there's a lot of cocktail hours. I go to barbecues, and like, what do I do now? I've since found that it's like a superpower at a conference because everyone else is, and I'm collecting business cards and making appointments left and right. But like, uh, it is a scary, it's a scary potential thing to go through.
Yeah, I love that. It is like a superpower. I did a year of working in corporate after I quit drinking, and it was amazing how much you think that it is so contributing to, at least I did, to my ability to market and do different things, but really it just wasn't. It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, what I found, so I'm in sales, so we're in similar situations, and I found that it I would have anxiety leading up to this event, like, oh, I don't know anyone here, and like, what am I going to do? And uh, alcohol definitely helped calm that down. But that is the only thing that helped me with. Like, I definitely now have much more substantial conversations, and I have, I think more productive meetings, at least on my side of the table, and that's been well worth it. That's been well worth it. And I learned the trick right off the bat. My mother-in-law also has a problem with drinking, and she told me like, as soon as you get there, put a drink in your hand. Like,
Mm-hmm.
just go get a soda water or something. So I cut out that awkward conversation, and then it's like no one noticed. Like it
Right.
was just, the night went on. So
Right. And the whole
yeah,
time you're watching people get sloppy and you're thinking, and I'm not. Woohoo, good for me.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
That's great. So what was I know there was like lots of different points along the journey, but was there any sort of pivotal moment where you're like, okay, now I'm ready to get serious about this?
There's a few things I think. So one, I'm part of a online sort of self-improvement group, and it's intense, and we really push each other, and I love it. And I joined that. When did I join that? In maybe December of last year, and I quit in May of this year. So we do these plans, and we have these goals, and we hold each other accountable, and they were just, I would go so far and then I wouldn't like quite make it all the way. And, I knew the whole time I knew like, all right, I'm making gains now, but I am only going to go so far until I need to take care of this because I need to have my evenings, right? I need to
Right.
have, need to be fully aware. And so, that was a big one for me. Like right around the April, May time frame is when I just realized like, all right, so the easy stuff is done. Like, in order to take the next steps, there's some things I have to do. And so that was a big thing for me. Another big thing for me, again, was reading your book, and that stuck with me. I mean, but I read it maybe 6 months before I quit drinking. And I tried to quit right when I read it, and then I'm like, well, it says here that it tastes bad. I should make sure that it still tastes bad. Like,
Right,
is that
right,
true? And like, but it was this whole process for me, right? I
right.
mean, either way, that liminal thinking, it's stuck in my head, and so I kind of had that going on in the background at the same time.
Yeah.
Um, and I really say it was those two things that really were the thing that pushed it. I mean, because I wasn't at a like destructive point with it. I mean, it certainly wasn't good for my health, but it wasn't like, my those my family was falling apart or my job was in jeopardy. And I mean, I'm much better at handling all of that stuff now, but it really was kind of those things of this sort of drive to self-improvement, and then realizing I got to get this out of my way if I'm going to keep growing.
Oh, I love that. I got to get this out of my way. I'm going to start quoting you. That's amazing. Yeah, I think I just came back from a conference with a bunch of just some of the most brilliant entrepreneurs I've ever met. And so many of them don't drink. And that's exactly why. It was like, this was holding me back.
Yeah,
When you become an entrepreneur, it's like your time is money. And so these people are building these amazing businesses, and they just realize that they are giving up time that they don't want to be giving up to being hungover,
yeah,
to drinking itself, to being drunk. And it was just, yeah, get that out of my way. And so
yeah,
I talked to a couple, they just stopped drinking 14 years ago. And there was no method about it. It was just basically like, it's time for this to be the next thing that kind of goes. And it's just, and I love that too, because it's amazing to be able to see. Okay, so if we go back to that really bad analogy of like, okay, alcohol's the driver or whatever, or maybe I'm on the train, like that car for me was going to bad places, and I could see that once I became aware. Like I could see that it was headed to ugly, scary places,
hmm
but it hadn't really gotten there yet. And so getting out of that car before I was forced out of the car, before it crashed and I had to leave it anyway. I mean, that's like, I'm so passionate about trying to make this a mainstream conversation for that exact reason. There was an article on CNN that came out just this week. It said one in 8 Americans abuse alcohol, and they're defining abuse as very heavy drinking. I guarantee you a much higher number. I mean, number one in 8 is a huge number. I mean, it's absolutely
yes,
huge.
yeah,
But then I guarantee a higher number are not completely happy in their relationship with
hmm
alcohol, or want to be drinking less. So I love that. Get it out of your way, and just get out of the car, before something goes really wrong. I think that's the conversation we need to start having, and anything that we can do to make that a less scary conversation for people, because I mean, there's so much fear around thinking that you're going to have
yeah,
to commit your life to giving it up. I mean, that's I think one of the things, and you probably have more experience with this with your father being in AA, but the people I know in AA, it is a lifestyle. So there is a new set of
yes,
friends. There's a new, Sunday night activity.
hmm
It's very much a lifestyle, as much as going to church is a lifestyle, or being, part of a corporation is a lifestyle. Like it's yeah.
yeah. I mean, you're right about that. One thing just about what you said earlier, that the driver analogy actually isn't that bad in the sense that like you do hope that you can turn, right? I mean, that's the thing, is that you feel like the car is going in a bad direction, but maybe there's still time. And that when you're at that point before something catastrophic happens, but while you simultaneously know like there's issues here, there's always that thought of like, well, maybe I can just do this or just do that. So I know that feeling well. And then in regards to AA, yeah, I mean, my dad is avid, has been going now, geez, I think it's been like 15 years consistently, and is one of the people that is really looked up to at his home group. And my best friend is also in AA and he's been off and on for the last couple of years, but on more than on consistently now for I think about a year. Um, and I tried that, I tried that path. It wasn't for me, it wasn't, I think, well, I did it wrong anyway. Like I quit drinking And about 60 days in is when I went to my first meeting. And that's mostly because my friend who's in it, was up at my place, and he's like, "Come with me to this meeting." And I thought, "Yes, great, let's do it." Um, and the first meeting was very emotional. Like, just meeting all these people was a huge meeting too. There were like 70 something people. The room's packed. And they were celebrating anniversaries of people, like 15 years and 20 years. And I'm like, this is fantastic. And I went back to a few more meetings, and particularly knowing that it worked for, my best friend and my dad. I'm like, this is great. Um, but at that point, and this sounds really strange to say, I mean, but not drinking wasn't necessarily my problem at that point. Like, and that's what a lot of those meetings focused on, was like, oh, today was really hard for me to not drink. And I don't mean to belittle anyone's struggle with that at all. That wasn't what I was struggling with. I was struggling with what the hell else to do with my time, right? And in the change of habit and all of that, but not picking up a beer was not an issue, once I got over the first, few weeks. And so I actually kind of moved out of AA, and just I haven't really been back. It wasn't that wasn't the thing for me.
I think
Go ahead.
it's such a cool thing because um, this conversation is awesome because AA is the thing for people, certain
Mhm.
people. Like it is the thing when you need to focus on this on a daily basis. And when not drinking, if you have 70 people who can like you can go to a meeting and you're struggling not to pick up the beer and there's 70 people in the room who are going to encourage you and give you like social proof, and like that's phenomenal, like that's unreal. So I guess just let the record show that I think AA is amazing. I just also think that similar to you, um, that wasn't my problem. Like I didn't, once I kind of changed my mindset, I remember going to Las Vegas and I had a girlfriend call me up. She was in AA and she's like, just so you know it's your first trip to Vegas. I'm going to be on speed dial. You can call me any time of day or night. Like you can totally rely on me. And,
Yeah.
and I'm sitting there thinking like, okay, well, that's cool, but why? Like, why would I need to call you?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I'm not tempted. I don't sit here with this. So I haven't quit because it's something I want to be doing that I'm no longer allowing myself to be doing. And I've quit because it's something I no longer want to be doing. And I think that's a really, really interesting distinction. And I think people can get there to where they no longer want to be doing it because they've actually gone through the life work. And that's another thing that AA has that's amazing. And it has a set of steps to like take you and
Yeah.
rebuild your life. But equally, you're saying, you weren't even really drinking in high school and stuff. And I think that so you knew how to deal with emotion, you knew how to deal with certain things. So it wasn't as if you had to rebuild this broken life. It was just as if, okay, so now I'm not doing that. So now what else am I going to be doing? And that's really cool. So
Yeah.
what else do you do? I'd love to hear.
Well, I do a few things. So I told you I'm very involved with that group online, but I've actually also started helping other people quit drinking.
Awesome.
And a lot of it has been through that, but I also work with people outside of that. And I have a full-time job, so I don't take on, more than 3 or 4 people at a time. But, I do exactly this. I have video chats. They have access to me all the time. So text messages and all of the ways. But I got to that through studying more. My hobby became studying the science around alcohol, and addiction in general. And so I read a lot of books, and because I have that sort of all that knowledge now and sort of that passion for that, that's been something that I've been doing.
That's awesome.
So yeah, and it's I guess that's the 13th step in AA, and that's something that's what it's called, right? Yeah, it's after I can't remember, but anyway, like that's the point where eventually you work the steps and then you help other people do that. I'm doing something, I guess, parallel but different.
Right.
Um, and I also became really interested in the different sort of views and ideas around addiction. Um, and even the question of, is addiction a disease, or how it's been treated over time. And I got absorbed in this stuff, so I've got a library full of books, I'm passionate about sharing that information and having those conversations with people.
Oh, I love that. So, are you looking for more people, or are you like are you?
Absolutely, yeah.
All
I'm
right.
I'm
Well,
always
tell
I'm
us
always
where to
open.
find you
So
then. That would be great. Yeah, tell the listeners
sure.
where to find you.
yeah, so I'm at scottpinyard.com. That's SCOTTPINYARD.com. And I have an email up there. There's a way to get in touch with me. And yeah, it's a very rewarding thing for me. And it's been a lot of fun to do.
Oh, that's so cool. That's so cool. So so now I'm going to pick your brain on some of your knowledge. So
Sure.
what about what have you learned about, the disease model versus not the disease? Like where has this led you? What are your own kind of theories?
I think the biggest thing, actually, I have the book right here. There's a book called The Biology of Desire by Mark Lewis. Have you read it?
Hmm.
Um, I think that one probably spoke to me the most. And honestly, I think I might owe the library money for this book at this point because I haven't bought it yet, but I've renewed it so many times. Um, but I think that the thing that really struck me, well, two things. The idea of the disease model in general never seemed to fully fit for me. I think logically, it just because I think of like cancer as a disease, or I think of diseases as diseases, and it always seemed weird to me that someone was having a disease that had a disease based on a repeated exposure to something. And I understand cancer and stuff like that are certainly that way, but this was something that was in under someone's control. Like the disease for alcoholism I see is cirrhosis or liver damage or all the myriad of other things. That's the disease, but the actual like addiction side of it, I don't know. It never really made sense. And so I really started to get into understanding the neuroscience behind it. And one of the things that Mark Lewis talks about in this book is that it might not be that it's actually a disease. It's more that your brain's working exactly as it's supposed to, with the idea of the reward pathways and how our behavior gets developed into habits over time. That's what causes the addiction, and that's maybe causes might not be the right word, but that's what sort of gets us into that addiction mindset. And that's been very interesting to me. It really mapped my own experience. Once I got over kind of the way I talk about it with some of the people I work with is it's like you're looking at the woods and there's a path that you take every day on the way home. You need to just take a different path and you're going to have to blaze the trail. And eventually that other one grows over. And that is a very simplified version of the analogy, but that's been the thing I think that's been the most fascinating to me. I'm a big science guy, and that's the sort of stuff that I like to read. So I focused on that a lot, and I also focus on what it means. So the reason that AA was, I think, tough for me because it wasn't that I just didn't want to focus on not drinking. I wanted to focus on other stuff. So also sort of the focus of what else do you do with your time? What else? So now you're getting rid of this. What are those other things? And I really like helping people think sort of optimistically and big in terms of goals and ideas and things they can do and like help try to set them up to do that.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, so in terms of the biology of desire and stuff, I love that because what it means is that nothing is wrong with us,
Hmm.
We weren't born this way, and guess what? We're just reacting how
Yeah.
anyone would react when a toxin that equally is toxic but also stimulates these reward centers in unnaturally high ways and levels. Our brain is functioning exactly how it should function. Um, I will say that I think once you can, so if you equate it to cancer in a way, if you're if you're born with cancer, like very young children can have cancer, and there's no rhyme or reason, right? Or actually, let's use a different analogy, and I might mess this up because my knowledge of diabetes isn't great, but I believe that there's two types of diabetes, and one is one that you're born with, and one is one that you get because of exposure to sugar or
Mhm.
carbs or whatever. And so if you are born with it, there's just not a lot you can do. But if you are getting it from exposure or from lifestyle, then it also creates in you an inability to produce enough insulin, right? So the outcome is that you do have a disease, but it's not a disease that was innate or inherent. It ends up being kind of a disease that, because of the repeated exposure to the toxin, your body has developed this disease. And I think that that kind of for me really encapsulates it, because both sides are almost covered. And of course, I mean, this is still, we're learning new stuff every day, which is one of the coolest and most exciting parts about this journey. But not only is it not a disease in terms of like, okay, well, throw my hands up, I was born
Hmm.
into this alcoholic family, there's nothing I can do about it, I'm just screwed. But equally, the caution of knowing, like, if you keep doing that, you will actually change how your brain works. Like, alcohol over time will reduce the number of dopamine receptors in your brain. That means that you will feel stimulation less. That means that you will not be as, engaged and excited in things that used to make you engaged and excited, right? And so it is not your fault. There's nothing that you were born with. There's nothing wrong with you. But then also, but at a certain point, you can definitely cause disease-like characteristics inside your body. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the idea of the disease model really came out sort of in opposition to the moralization model, right? That like it is your fault, like you were saying, like it's your fault, you're just weak, you're whatever. And that was for a long time, and actually to some extent still is a pretty widespread sort of theory around this. And I think the disease model was a way for people to talk about it with language that would take some of the blame away. And I think also, honestly, it's a lot easier to get funding and stuff to research diseases than it is for, I don't know what you would call that, a moral failure or whatever it might be. Um, and I totally see that and I understand it, but at the same time, like I said, I feel like the disease is the end result, kind of like what you were talking about with the diabetes. The disease isn't eating too many carbs, or the disease isn't leading an unhealthy lifestyle that gets you to that point. The disease is the end result of that. And I'm really interested in what we can do between now and that 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 time to change things. And it's possible and it's exciting to see people do it.
Yeah, I love that. I absolutely love it. So, two more questions for you. First, what has been kind of the most surprising thing for you? One of the things that you just thought, okay, well, this is super surprising about not drinking anymore.
I actually like mornings. I for such a long time, thought I'm just a night person and I don't like mornings. And honestly, I really do I get a burst of energy around 10 or 11 o'clock at night, and that just means I need to be in bed before then. But I get up early. I get up way before the rest of my family, and that's when I do my workout and that's when I do my stuff for the day that I want to, for my group and just the things that I do, and sometimes prepare for calls and stuff that are happening later in the day. Actually, last week I had a call at 4:30 in the morning with someone in Australia that I'm working with on this stuff. So, but yeah, that's probably the biggest surprise is I actually enjoy that, and by the time I get up and make some coffee and I'm good to go.
Oh, that's so cool. Okay, and then my next question is, if somebody's thinking about this, or if they're like, oh, I heard of this naked mind and I'm just kind of thinking about it, what what advice, like, what would you tell yourself when you were kind of on the other side? What advice would you give? How would you allay their fears, and what would you tell them about what it's like on this side of the fence?
Well, a few things. I mean, in terms of allaying the fears, I think the first thing I would say, and then you say it in the book, is you don't have to stop drinking like right when you read this book. I think one of the most powerful aspects of it for me was that I kept drinking after I read the book, but that those thoughts were in my head, and I think that's such a big part of what actually pushed me to make the decision and be able to commit to it. Because I had tried before and it just didn't really work out. So that would be a big thing is to get that knowledge and think about it. Don't react to it emotionally, totally. Get some other information in your head, and then live with it and see what that is like for you. And I forgot the second half of the question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, just what would you tell your former self about what it's kind of like on this side?
Oh, hmm, that's a good question. It's not. It doesn't suck. I think for a long time that was kind of where I was that, man, this is going to be boring and all my friends drink and what am I going to do at parties and all of this. all of that stuff doesn't matter at all. And honestly, when it comes to not drinking at parties or in groups, I don't normally bring it up. I just order something else. Because, like you pointed out in the book, that can make things awkward if you say, oh, no, I don't drink. But it is so much better. I mean, and you hear that all the time, and it's kind of cliche, but I would say, being more productive personally, because I have a demanding job, and that was a big part of all of my, waking hours, was making sure that I was satisfying the requirements and exceeding the requirements for that. But I didn't have as much time for myself personally. And so now I have that time, whether it's being clear-headed, after I'm done with work at night, or, waking up at 4:30 in the morning and having 2-3 hours before someone else gets up. Like, that's something that's possible for me now. And because of that, I've achieved things. I've hit goals. I've done more than I thought I possibly could. And not drinking has been absolutely central to that.
Oh, that's so cool. Now I have 2 quotes. It doesn't suck. That's awesome.
It doesn't.
That's so cool. That's great.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know what it's like. I mean, when you're staring at that, it just seems like it's terrible. So
yeah, it does. It's terrifying. And then you're like, what? If only I would have known. Like, if only I would have known.
Exactly. Yes.
I wouldn't have wasted so much time. It's crazy. Well, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Very cool. Anything else?
Not that I can think of. I mean, like I said, I would encourage people to learn as much as they can about it. I know for me that was a path. And actually, maybe one other thing is that, AA and, AA is something that has helped a lot of people, and is kind of I guess I would call it the cultural norm, in terms of, you got to quit drinking, it's time to go to a church basement. Well, it isn't necessarily for everyone. And there are so many other paths out there, and there's plenty of good, other good programs. And so if someone is thinking about it, but struggling with the idea of AA, or struggling with the idea of, a program, I just really encourage doing some research. And there's so many options out there. You can find something that'll work for you.
Yeah, I think that's really true. Like, AA is awesome, but it's one way. And, it works for one personality type or one group of people. And this is not a black and white issue. There's a huge spectrum of different people. So it's really encouraging to see that, and just, you're not alone, because it is, I think the very vast majority of regular drinkers wonder about their drinking. I would bet my life on that. I mean, I know.
I think you're totally right. Yeah, yeah.
We just don't talk about it.
Alone.
Yeah, you do, because you don't talk about it. Because when somebody says, someone can come into, a situation and be like, oh, I feel like I've really been, drinking too much soda or eating too many carbs. And like, it's totally a kosher conversation. Somebody can even say other things, but you come in and say, like, I feel like I've been drinking too much. Everybody's like, ooh, like, really?
Right.
Ooh, well, I don't know if I want to have this conversation. It's like,
exactly. Right. And then you end up kind of, alone in a room full of people. And that's weird. And the weird part about that is there's probably other people sitting right next to you around that are thinking the same thing.
My experience has shown that over and over and over, because obviously I became public about it when I published the book, and then people are like, oh, me too. I mean, I can't tell you how many people from my high school, from my former job, from my social circles, from my mommy circles, from my groups at school. It's crazy. If people just come up to you and, oh my gosh, me too. I've been wondering about this. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, I found the same thing with AA. The few meetings I did go to. I don't live in a very big town. So I'm in Maine, right? So I was surprised when I was there, the number of people I recognized from different places, and that's good. That's a good thing,
right.
to kind of see other people going through it.
Yeah, we're all putting on this show, and if we just get honest about it, we'd all be in a better place. This has been great, Scott. Thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate your time, and it's been a really good conversation.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. It's been fun.
This has been Annie Grace with This Naked Mind podcast. Thank you so much for listening. You can learn more at thisnakedmind.com. And please remember to rate, review, and subscribe, as it really helps us spread the word.